Good morning, everyone. You all can hear me all right?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you so much for your patience while we get all our technical issues situated. My name is Jared. This is the 10th Tipped Workers Coordinating Council meeting. I'm calling this meeting to order. Excuse me. First, order of business, we will have the roll call, starting here with Alan Karnofsky.
Present.
Larry Villegas Perez.
Present, I'm here.
Jennifer McCahill.
Present.
Tracy Javier. Zach Hoffman.
Present.
Lisa Abrams.
Present.
Andrew Klein.
Present.
Fantastic. I would now motion to approve the previous meeting's minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Fantastic. The meeting's minutes are approved. I'm going to open the first part of the meeting for public comment. Is there anyone from the public who's joining us this meeting with any questions or concerns, comments? No? No public comment? Fantastic. Our previous meeting's discussion was dominated by a discussion on third-party payroll and specifically their role within, I'm not going to say the whole statute number, but how reporting requirements. I don't see any of the members of the NPRC here with us. Am I correct on that? Andrew, would either of those gentlemen be able to join us?
No, I didn't extend an invitation. Didn't realize.
Okay, that's all right.
Again.
Excuse me. So DOES was able to look over the materials that they send and their kind of suggestions. We all do have the official response that should have gone out to you this morning. My apologies for not going out sooner. I just didn't get to it before today, but we all do have it. It's fairly short, so I hope we all were able to look over it. I'm going to pass it to Alan, and Mr. King will chime in as necessary, just to go over what their, I guess, findings were, or the agency's stance on the materials that were submitted by NPRC, and then how we came to this conclusion, this answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we did review, like the chairman said, the documents and materials from NPRC, reviewed the comments that were made at the last council meeting that we had in February. So we sent this formal response back to the chair. Since the conversation initiated at a council meeting, we figured it'd be best to send it back to the chair, and then we can share this response with the payroll providers. I don't think it's been shared with them just yet, but essentially the response points to the two relevant statutes that we are working to build our TIP portal off of. So today we can go through, the specific requirements within the statute that we are, building the portal out of. I think that the main points that NPRC was making at the last meeting were based off of previous legislations or iterations of the legislation. So this legislation has gone through a few changes in the past So we've pulled out the relevant, statutes to go over, to address their concerns. I know they're not here today, but, we can invite them back. We can have more conversations with them. I think, they've met with the wage and hour team previously on multiple occasions to go over the TIP portal and their concerns. So, I assume those conversations will also continue. So if we want to pause here for any general questions, or if we want to go right into the statute, let me know.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. It was very difficult to follow the intervention of our colleague because there was some kind of echo behind. So I just got syllables from each word, and I'm so sorry.
Echo. He said there was an echo.
Can you hear me okay, Larry?
Yes.
Okay, maybe.
Larry, is this better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, so I guess we just got to be a little closer. Okay, basically, Larry, I was saying we sent the formal response back to our chair in regards to the conversation that came up at the last council meeting. The letter that we sent essentially points to the statutes that are relevant today and how we're building our TIP portal, how the Department of Employment Services is building the TIP portal. So there's two specific statutes that we want to review today. And I essentially mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it in the letter, but our belief was that the comments made at the last meeting were maybe based off of a previous iteration of the legislation. We want to point to the current legislation and show how we're adhering to the law as it stands today. So if
I may, I don't think there's any question about whether the agency's adhering to the law. I mean, our concern and the concern of the third-party payroll providers is that it's making it very difficult. They can't certify. And this is an issue that DOES has been aware of for some time, because I personally was in meetings with DOES representatives and Councilmember Silverman about this. Must be 2 years ago, because it was live in her office. So I think everyone knows what the current statute is, but I don't think that obviates the concerns that were raised at the last meeting. So, I mean, we obviously will continue to talk about it, but, what I would recommend and request is that this group send a letter to Councilmember Silverman expressing the concerns that have been raised and asking her to take another look at it. I mean, I think that the conclusion, which is appropriate in the letter from DOES that I received this morning, says that it would require a legislative fix. So if it needs to be fixed, if we agree that it needs to be fixed, then let's request a legislative fix.
Yes, I think we do want to make sure we're on the same page. I think that some of the concerns in the written materials from NPRC referenced that DOES was doing things that were burdensome to the payroll providers, but our understanding is we are following the law exactly as it's written, and what we're requiring. So,
well, but wait, I'm sorry, I have to stop you. Yes, you are, but that doesn't mean it's not burdensome. I mean, I don't understand. You're saying you're following the law as written, and I think the point that's tried to be made is that the law as written is burdensome, and another look should be taken at it. Otherwise, yeah. My members, REMW, which is why I'm on this council, Western Association of Metropolitan Washington, our concern is that we're going to lose payroll providers, and we're not going to have a competitive environment with respect to payroll providers.
Yeah, understood. And at the last meeting, I asked if it's a legislative change that would be needed, and then the payroll providers said no, they believe this is on DOES to fix. So I think we wanted to ensure we cleared it up that if we believe there's a legislative fix that's needed, we can, work together as a council to make that recommendation to the council, the DC council, to make the legislative fix.
That's fair enough. I think that's reasonable.
Okay.
So, Alan, this is Zach Hoffman. What I'm hearing, because I agree with everything that Andrew just said, what I'm hearing is that maybe we need to identify specifically the statutes that may need to be addressed in some sort of recommendation format to allow DOES to operate within the bounds of the law while not being overly burdensome to and creating an environment that's not hospitable to payroll providers, which is a essential service, I think we can agree, at large. Is that what I'm hearing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Because I think that all
Mr.
makes
Chairman, this is Larry, if I may. So I am open to all kinds of conversations and discussions. We would also need to look at how those changes would impact information that is rightful for employees to collect. One of the biggest issues that we have encountered when we speak to people either in the industry or the streets or every time we are visiting the deep wage industry establishments is that there is not enough information on their pay stubs to know exactly how many hours they got paid a certain amount of money, and if they were like specifically as the law says. So yes, we can have all kinds of conversations. We also need to take into consideration how is that going to impact the right that employees in DC have to know exactly what they are paying for and under what categories. Thank you.
If I may, Larry, that's a great point as well. And I felt after that meeting last month that there sounded like there were options available to us to creating an environment where the employees do have access to a greater amount of information while not writing a code that is not in touch with reality. So I think you're absolutely correct. And I think based on what I heard, and that might be different from everybody else, but I heard that there were options available to that just require a sharpening and a focusing of the statutes as opposed to just going with kind of this more blunt, overreaching situation that we have now.
So let's back up for a moment. Tom, would you put the statute back up that Alan was going to address? And so, I mean, it sounds like we're just going straight back to square one, where we had our discussion last week. Alan asked very clearly, do we think that there needs to be a legislative change? The answer was no. The suggestion was this sort of Maryland alternative. If I understand you all correctly, you went through that suggestion, compared it to what's happening via the TIP portal, and everything that is in the TIP portal will both address the law. It's not the Maryland alternative, but this isn't Maryland. So what is it that's outlined in this statute that is so burdensome to the payroll providers? That's what I would like to understand clearly. And,
well, perhaps
yeah,
we should have them back then, and I think we discussed that last time, but as I understand it, the issue is them certifying that there's compliance with the wage hour law as it applies to tipped employees, which they're not in a position to do. They're only in a position to report based upon the information that's given to them by the employer.
Certification that the information in the report was generated. Okay. I'll ask a similar question, or maybe the same question, just a little differently. Alan, what made you, intimate that their suggestion may be based off of prior information?
There was a specific concern they mentioned about the weekly reporting requirements. I think that's what it was, which may have not been in a previous iteration of legislation. Am I saying that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so but it is mentioned in this, that it has to be a weekly reports for each individual employee. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So average hourly wage received per week during the
Previously,
quarter.
it was per quarter.
Got it.
And so the current portal is based off of the previous iteration of the law, which was to provide the information per quarter.
And they were saying that to do this every week during a quarter.
No, they were saying that providing the information based on the old law, which was to have the entire quarter submitted at once, was the hardship. What we're creating now is a portal that will receive that information on a weekly basis.
I have a question. The portal sounds like it's, information is input through the employer weekly.
And
Is that the model?
They submit reports on a quarterly basis.
On a quarterly basis. So then we are asking the payroll companies through this to have a weekly breakdown of the quarterly reports?
That's what the law requires now.
But that's what it's saying right now. Okay. That makes more sense, why that would be difficult.
wait, what would be?
You're essentially asking for an additional report from the payroll company, which is not something that in their mind of like what services they offer is something that they offer. Like a weekly breakdown of each employee for every business that they service, like that starts to add up a lot.
Yeah.
Now that, yeah.
My understanding of their issues is that not every employer that has tip workers reports on a weekly basis. So they may have a bi-weekly basis, which is still in compliance with the law. It would be easier for them to submit information on whatever payroll period that employer reports. But the law requires that it be broken down into 13 weeks for each quarter. So that's how we are preparing the portal to receive those reports. Every quarter, employers will have to submit a 13-week breakdown of how those employees were paid. And the payroll company says that's not always synonymous with how the regular pay period goes for those employers.
Okay. So a potential solution here is changing those words to say, to reflect the pay period schedule of the business, potentially.
That's more a question.
With nobody
from
from the payroll company here to say that that's a good idea or not,
Right.
but like that's a potential solution. That's a one sentence, I mean, yeah, I think we can.
I think we should check with them.
Right.
It depends on their systems.
Hey, Zach, I missed what you said. What was the solution?
So we just had that discussion where it's on a weekly basis of reporting through the entire quarter, but it has been surmised that potentially that's not in line with how most people break down their payroll schedules.
Right,
which
right.
might be weekly. You know, I'm paid weekly. That's kind of weird. That's not a normal thing, but it's usually every 2 weeks or monthly or whatever the case may be. So changing the wording to put it in line with what is already going on in the businesses they're servicing, which is probably a bi-weekly pay period,
Gotcha.
might be a potential solution to offer them to,
The other thing is that it does use the word average. So if you get paid bi-weekly, you submit a report that has the same numbers divided by 2?
It's not always that simple, though. They could be paid at various pay rates.
Yeah,
Or if they work
overtime.
And that's what they
overtime.
were, okay, yes, got it, right. Okay,
I just think it would be good for us to kind of maybe come up with some potential solutions so that maybe if we do have them back next month, we can kind of hit them all, 3 or 4 things that like, hey, these are kind of what we think might be issues, and then we can kind of go from there, kind of come to the table with a full deck of cards.
yeah, I mean, I think that to this point, if without further input from them, there's no use in us doing their work for them, no offense. That I agree, it sounds like that could be a potential, an idea to think about, but, like we said, we can't answer. So, I don't have anything further on this topic unless anyone else does.
Were there anything else that they mentioned specifically, or mentioned, or thought about, or inferred that they were?
There was a second law.
Oh, yeah, we reference, the second statute.
And specifically the information on the pay stubs.
Mhm.
This was the main line that they brought
Yeah.
an issue with.
Tip declaration form for the pay period. And what was the issue?
They didn't see the reason for this and being included. It's not something that they felt generally goes on a pay stub or on a tip wage worker's, information. They don't know how it gives them any benefit of showing compliance. And they were presenting an alternative from how Maryland does.
Yeah. They said, the DC report is ineffective, requiring the employer to display on pay statements or separately an employee's own tip declaration form delineating cash tips and credit card tips. And then they go on to say how we should not do that and use Maryland's form for reporting.
Which is different how?
I guess they don't require that sort of detailed delineation.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, the issue was that by not reporting tips that came from like credit cards or so, people would be more at risk of not getting their wages as expected, and that would put on the employee more pressure to actually talk to the employer when they suspected that they did not get the wages as required by law, meaning that we're working in DC with a huge population of women, people of color, people whose language is not, whose first language is not English, and historically, they have been less upfront about their rights and benefits, and just to take that off their shoulders, the law was very specific about what content needed to be in that report. So would be the government the one looking at what was reported and see if it fit with the law, and then do the due diligence to do an investigation as appropriate.
I mean, in the first instance, isn't this a relationship between an employer and an employee? I mean, the notion that we're going to inject a third party into this relationship, I mean, I think in the first instance, employers, employees need to figure out how to communicate with each other. And I understand the issues that you're raising, Larry, but I also think that the solution to that is not to insert the government, but to empower employees to speak up. I mean, the government can only do so much. I mean, DOES is his mission is already impossible, given what the council loads on them with legislation every year. So, I mean, I don't see that as a viable solution to aiding the employees. I think we need to empower employees to be able to deal with their employers, and speak up. I understand historically the issues that you're speaking about, and I agree with them and I appreciate them. But I don't think government inserting themselves into that relationship is gonna solve anything. And maybe that's a discussion that's beyond the confines of this council and is something to be talked about by the DC council. But I mean, I'm concerned about this as a potential solution and see it as just another potential layer of bureaucracy. It's not really going to help workers, but is going to see employers penalized.
How, in what way would this not help workers?
In what way would it? Well, in what way would it help workers? I mean, at the end of the day, it seems to me the key is always enforcement. And the best enforcement, in my experience, is when an employee can raise their hand and say, "Hey, this isn't right." That's the best enforcement of any other mechanisms there can be. Is for employees to be able to assert their rights.
And yes, I agree with that. And the best way to do that is with information. And from what I read about this line, it's breaking down the information of an employee's wages in more detail so that the employee can understand and therefore raise their hand if and when they believe that they've been paid in a way that's unfairly or otherwise, that isn't in accordance with how they worked. So, I mean, unless I'm reading it incorrectly, please point it out to me if I am, but I'm just seeing that this is asking for the breakdown to be more transparent, and therefore that communication that you're talking about, that line of communication between employees and employers, should only increase from this, not decrease.
Right, but you also have to balance the burden on the employer, and in the situation that we're talking about, the ability of third-party payroll providers to provide the information. Because if we give them an impossible mission, as they've voiced on their own, and I'm not here to do their bidding, that's not my job, they're going to pull out of the market. And that's what our concern is. I think that they need to be given a mission that they can actually accomplish. And if they're given more than that, then that's going to create difficulty, and that's what we heard last time.
Okay. I mean, I think maybe we're back to that place where we shouldn't speak on their behalf as long as they're not here. But I do think that it's fairly egregious to suggest that they would just go ahead and pull out of market. I mean, I know that they said that, and I know that they said that. I would like to see further action toward that end before I believed it. No offense. I still think that, especially for the Tipped Workers Coordinating Council, we should work to create opportunities for education amongst tipped workers. If it places burden on businesses, we're certainly willing to listen and compromise and discuss. But this, to me, again, please point out to me if I'm reading it incorrectly. This only seeks to benefit tipped workers. And as the chair of the Tipped Workers Coordinating Council, I'm not going to stand in the way in that.
Can I say one thing? I just thought about this while you were talking, but what is a cash tip when you are in a system where all of your tips are paid to you in cash?
when all of your
What is,
tips are paid in
what is
cash?
considered a cash tip if through the mechanisms of your employment, because I've worked in a lot of different ways that I've been paid. I have gotten all of my tips, credit card and otherwise, paid to me in cash at the end of a shift,
Right.
which is different than the place I've worked where I've made cash and I've made credit card tips, and I put it all to the employer, and it all comes back to me on a paycheck.
Sure.
So what is legally a cash tip in this instance, and how would the employer delineate that on a pay stub, given that there are
Yeah.
countless ways that tipped workers are paid based on individual business
Well, I
operations?
think there's two different ways to say it though, right? So there's one business where like your tips are literally like almost always cash.
Mhm.
And then there's the setup that you're talking about where like you work in a restaurant,
Mhm.
people will often pay and then tip via credit card, but then you get paid out in cash through the manager. From what I understand, that's usually a way to, it's about the credit card fees, the credit card processing fees, right?
Mhm.
So whether it's 2%, 3%,
Mhm.
the restaurant in that case will often say, I'll take on the 2%, whether we do 90% credit card sales or 10% credit card sales. In exchange, I'll pay you out in cash. And, I mean, that's up to the restaurant, if they, you know, depending on how many credit card sales they do a day versus cash sales. Which is still different from, right, if you're likely not a restaurant, but could be, a person who receives a lot of cash tips.
Yeah.
But either way, I don't understand your question with regard to this.
My question is point to the statute in the DC law that tells me, defines what a cash tip is, and I can tell you that this makes a little bit of a precarious situation.
Well,
Not that I disagree with everything you said before.
yeah.
I think it is a good idea, but let me ask you that where is cash tip defined in any of the statutes?
I don't know the answer to that, but I would say that from what I understand this is asking,
Mhm.
let's say you worked in that restaurant that paid you out in cash at the end of the night, your pay stub would still have to say how much of that payout was credit card tips.
Sure.
And then if you get it in cash at the end of the night, you can do whatever you want with it, that's your business, but they are still required to report the credit card tip. So I think the answer is a cash tip is anything that's not a credit card tip. The credit card tip goes through this processing and then is labeled that way.
I think you're correct. I see that as a rebuttable presumption for a lawsuit, if I was the payroll provider.
But the information's still given to them, because like, even through like the payroll company, like it still will show cash tips like on whatever they send, or not cash, I mean credit.
Yeah.
So the whole caching is kind of like, was it honor code in a way?
But when are we considering it a cash tip? When it's given or when it's received? Because specifically, the intention of this law was to have a written record of tips received and reporting them with cash versus credit card, and incorporating that into a written system that has the employer verification, the payroll company transparency backup, and the employee having a greater understanding of their own income. Now, if you overlay that on what is a cash tip, that very much is a question that you have to ask. Is it the tips received as a form of payment, or is it the tips dispersed through the payment mechanism? And that's something that I think has to be considered there.
And some businesses reported, Mr. Chairman, as gratuities, which includes the tips, the cash tips, credit card tips, and anything else, even through the tip pool. So
I'm going to recommend this. Given that this issue is better understood and was brought to us by the third-party payroll providers, I'm going to request that they tell us what it is they think needs to be fixed and why, and that they get that to us within 10 days. And then I would hope that DOES could look at it within the next 10 days and report to us by email, so that at the next meeting, we can have a better informed discussion about this, and then we can make the decision as to whether we want reps from the third-party payroll providers there or not. But it seems to me that's probably the most efficient way to proceed. I mean, at one point it was thought that this could be fixed without amendments to the current law, but we're now hearing that's not true. So let's go back to them and say, okay, so this is what DOES says. What do you think needs to be fixed and why? And we'll have the tip worker council look at that and consider it and see if it's something that they want to recommend.
Works for me.
I like that.
Now, how are we going to make possible for all payroll entities that work with the tip wage industry to be available for this discussion?
They have an organization. Their representative was with us last time, just like the Restaurant Association, whom I represent, and the Hotel Association, whom Lisa Abrams, who's on our council, represents. We can hear from him.
Okay.
Did you want to share our response with those representatives, or do you want us to send it, just forward it?
I don't know.
I'm happy to share it. Fine with me.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yes, please, Andrew. Final thoughts?
I think we have a solution there.
Great. I did not, I thought of it last minute. Larry, was your
Yes.
office able to put together a suggested penalty schedule? We discussed at the last meeting.
So we had an internal conversation regarding the law and what it allows and does not allow to do. And we need to take a closer look at what the process is according to the law. There is one shared point of information regarding a poster that has to come from OHR and DOES. There is a fine of $100 per day when businesses do not comply with that portion. The second portion was the claims of sexual harassment. Claims of sexual harassment are already included in the DCRA, the DC Human Rights Act, and there is already a system for that. What we need to take a closer look is what happens when businesses do not comply with, for example, having a sexual harassment policy. Do not display it, provide it to their employees, and do not provide a copy to the DC Office of Human Rights. So that's where our next conversation is going to be. But we haven't created a fine schedule for that one because we looked at what is covered so far to make sure that we understand what it is not. And then once we get to that point, which should be by the next meeting, we would then suggest if this is a conversation for the council, for the mayor, or there is another figure that could actually help us without addressing the law in terms of amendments. And I hope that I made my point clear. If not, let me know.
Yes, no, that's fine. Just keep us updated, and whatever we need to do as a council, whether it's write a recommendation to the council or the mayor, I'm sure you'll let us know. Yes, great. Okay, apologies, that was not on the agenda. I thought of it at the last minute, but I'm glad we got that covered. This item, overview on the TIP data management system. I'm not familiar with this.
So it would be in reference to the discussion.
The portal and the,
portal,
okay,
yes.
all right,
So because they're not here, then.
perfect, great.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I can share that, the portion of the portal as it relates to OHR, where businesses that hire, individuals who receive tips as wages is up, running, and published. We're in the process of reaching out to, our colleagues at, DOES, Office of Night and Culture, DCRA, ABRA, and anyone else that could have a list, that, may contain businesses that do such business, if I can use the redundancy. So everybody knows that the portal is up and running, is very easy to use, and they can send us the documentation as requested.
Great, that's great to hear. If there are no further comments, we can motion to adjourn. Anybody have anything else? Fantastic. Once again, thank you for your patience earlier to the start of the meeting, but we stayed on time. Andrew, looking forward to the follow-up, same with you, Larry, and once again, if you all have concerns that you would love to bring to the council, please contact me. And I appreciate you all for being here. Motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Second.
Everybody wants to get out. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you again. Have a great Thursday afternoon.
Have a good week, everybody.
Bye-bye.